Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of Asian Battle Royale. This is going to be the second to last episode of the series, so I hope you're ready for the finale, because I already know which country is going to win. But with that, let's get right into it. If you missed the last episode, then you'll be a bit confused, but not that confused. Basically, the AAA got divided up by the two alliances that are still existent, and then there was a long peace, and then after that peace, tensions started again when Iraq started acting erratically and invaded into Georgia with the help of Kazakhstan. So we're going to resume into that plot line right now because yet another alliance is being formed between the two of them as Iraq officially withdraws from the Arab Accords, and Tibet will strangely enough join it. And they are calling themselves the Central Powers, which maybe isn't exactly the name you want to take because they didn't really win the war that the actual Central Powers participated in. But that is what they're calling themselves. They are quite central to the continent. They start calling the MPA the Eastern Powers and the Arab Accords the Western Powers, even though neither of them go by that. And they're kind of hoping to get other countries to join their alliance. Unfortunately for them, no one does. And instead, the world is now just divided into three power blocks until after a very long time, maybe another 2 years or so, maybe even 3, the MPA and Arab Accords officially merge into one block that are still just called the MPA. And this kind of finally scares countries into joining the Central Powers, specifically Korea. And Indonesia and the Philippines are still just scared out of their minds about what could happen. And then Mongolia announces that Taiwan is supposed to be part of them, and the peace treaty that undid the war between the AAA and the MPA clearly said Taiwan is supposed to be part of Mongolia, even though it didn't. And so they declare war, not on the Philippines, but solely on the island of Taiwan. And unfortunately for the Philippines, they know that they're just going to have to concede, and while the Taiwanese soldiers themselves fight bravely, they're no match for Mongolia as they fall. However, this does kind of nudge the Philippines a little bit in one direction, that being they are now a member of the Central Powers. And the Central Powers can no longer call themselves the Central Powers, so they're now calling themselves the United Resistance. They consider the MPA to be kind of like an authoritarian regime acting on behalf of India. So they call themselves the United Resistance, or UR, in opposition to the MPA. And that name convinces Indonesia to join the alliance. So now we have, for the first time, every single country in the world is aligned. And tensions are just going to keep growing, now officially at an all-time high. And what's finally going to break the tensions is a resistance movement, which is ironic because of the alliance that's calling themselves the Resistance. And this is basically some Israelis and Palestinians who have not merged into a single identity, but have a common enemy, being the Lebanese, as well as the Syrians a little bit, but they don't really care about the Syrians very much. And they start rebelling against the Lebanese. And although not directly supported by the Universal Resistance, the Universal Resistance is definitely basically saying, hey, you can join our alliance if you win. And of course they're going to win, because the MPA not only can never agree on anything, but also really wants to seem like the good guys. And so Israel/Palestine is granted independence under one state, which might not go well because there are two separate ethnicities in the country, but for now they are in one state. And Lebanon will actually, as soon as they grant independence, maybe a month or two after, will have an election of a new leader because they are democratic right now. The new leader says, actually, no, we don't give you independence, we're getting you back. And they declare war on Israel-Palestine, and Syria will actually help them out now. And this leads to the Universal Resistance saying, hey, wait a second, Israel-Palestine is part of our alliance. And they basically threaten Syria and say, Syria, if you don't stop this, we're going to go to war with you. And Syria's like, well, hey, you're the one whose country is invading Lebanon, or something like that. And that is the last straw, as Iraq starts moving troops into Syria. And the final major war of this series is about to commence. The UAE will start retaliating by moving troops into Iraq, and Saudi Arabia is getting liberated by the MPA. Meanwhile, in the east, things start out a lot more calm, but eventually Kazakhstan tries to take advantage of the opportunity, as they always do, and moves troops into Mongolia. And Mongolia was not expecting this, and all of a sudden Tibet starts helping as well. Mongolia was really focused on defending against Korea, but Taiwan launches a rebellion against Mongolia that is supported by the Philippines, and Taiwan is re-annexed into the Philippines officially, which just kind of ignites the cannon that was the eastern theater of this war, as Indonesia starts invading into the SEAF, taking a whole bunch of land from them. India starts invading into Kazakhstan, and that's actually pretty successful, but they can't really invade into Tibet because of how mountainous it is. In the Western Front, things are going a lot better for the MPA, as they've kind of fully collapsed Israel-Palestine and officially re-annexed them into Lebanon. And they are continuing to invade into Iraq, almost taking Baghdad. Georgia will rebel against their occupiers, and things are not going well for the UR. However, Korea is invading into Mongolia, but Mongolia was prepared, and so this ends up being a pretty decent stalemate, as Mongolia manages to slow down the Kazakh invasion as well. Iraq finally loses Baghdad, and their leader flees into Kazakhstan, across this border and then across the Caspian Sea, as the rest of the area west of the Caspian finally falls to the MPA. To make things even worse, Turkmenistan tries to rebel against Kazakhstan and actually successfully does it. Kazakhstan will withdraw some troops from northern Mongolia in order to help deal with that, which they do. But then Iran, trying not to be cut in half, I guess the UAE, but the Iranian Emirate of the UAE, starts an invasion into Turkmenistan anyway, taking it from Kazakhstan. Tibet is still holding strong because they're a fortress, and the place where the UR is doing the best is in the Eastern Front, specifically against the SEAF, where they're just completely winning because the SEAF wasn't prepared for this war, was technologically behind a lot of the rest of Asia, and also is against Indonesia and the Philippines, who are two of the stronger members of the alliance, as well as the fact that they don't have anyone else they're focusing on. They'll collapse pretty quickly, and Myanmar is now being invaded into. Myanmar will basically, to defend their homeland, which is the Myanmar part of them, which actually works pretty well, but the problem is they withdraw a bunch of troops from their Chinese territories, which leads to not even so much invasions by the UR, they do a bit, but more so Chinese revolts against Burmese rule, as Tibet starts invading, and they're kind of welcomed as liberators by the Chinese. And all of a sudden, Mongolia is separated from the rest of their front and needs to start sending troops in to deal with the West. Unfortunately for the UR, they're still losing the Western Front, as Kazakhstan has been completely cut off from the Caspian Sea and is starting to get pushed east with their capital now in sight. And Tibet has started to fall, as much of a fortress as they are, with Kazakhstan being pushed back on this front by Mongolia. Korea is still in a stalemate, and it seems like this war is going to be the UR getting squeezed out by the MPA. Remember, the UR is green, the MPA is orange. And Kazakhstan does indeed lose most of their territory, with a lot of their leaders fleeing into Tibet, as Tibet, as much of a fortress as it is, starts to fall. But then, all of a sudden, something interesting happens. Korean troops are spotted in the north of Mongolia, and they quickly move towards Ulaanbaatar and take it. There were no troops defending that area because it wasn't a front line. And then people realized what happened. Russia had allowed Korean troops to invade into Mongolia. And soon, Korean troops, as well as Kazakh troops that had fled, start invading into the northern parts of Kazakhstan. Chinese rebels finally take back all of the land that was part of Myanmar, as they start taking back parts of China that are also just rebelling. And all of a sudden, Mongolia has fallen, with their government not finding a suitable place to flee to in time and being captured in Ulaanbaatar. And so while the military may still be fighting, it's kind of over for them. And just like that, there's yet another breath of air for the UR, who starts taking Myanmar with the newfound vigor they have as Bangladesh rebels. Sri Lanka will also rebel against Indian rule, and India will stamp it out with such violence that even some of their allies start condemning them. Iran will now start to have riots against the UAE. The UAE will have to come deal with them, but they'll decide to withdraw from a large portion of Kazakhstan in order to do that, which leaves Kazakhstan in a much better position than they just were in, as they liberate the portions of their territory that were across the Caspian and start invading into Georgia, as Armenian and Azerbaijani rebels help them out in taking Georgia, as well as potentially Russia. Air raids are commenced over Baghdad, but they're not bombs, they're propaganda, and it convinces the citizens of Baghdad to rise up. And although that doesn't really last and it leads to like half the population of Baghdad being massacred, it does lead to some small gains over here, which are very important because they just closed off the Caspian, where a decent amount of UAE naval assets were, and they're all destroyed, which is very bad for the UAE. Mongolia will surrender because they see where this war is going for them, and this allows for a massive front to be made here, as Tibet is almost fully liberated. India is now being invaded into more thoroughly, and their population is not happy with it, and they start threatening to overrule their government or overthrow their government, which leads to India surrendering, or not surrendering, but like silently leaving the war, and Sri Lanka gets added to this to the UR, as all of the land India was occupying goes over to Kazakhstan, who now easily takes out Iran, since Iran wanted to be out anyway. And Baghdad is once again liberated, although it's now a shell of its former self. And very quickly, the UAE will be taken before they can surrender. Yemen will surrender as quickly as they can, as well as Syria. But Lebanon will refuse to surrender because they worry that they'll lose Israel-Palestine again, and so they will be taken out. And this is where we are going to end this episode. This peace treaty was pretty harsh, but it's what you got to do. The 3 countries that surrendered actually got out pretty well, but not the countries that didn't. So with that, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.